online therapy for those affected by disability and illness. Hello, my name is Helen Rutherford, and I'd like to start by telling you a bit about how I came to focus my counselling work on disability and illness. I am founder of Emotional Respite Disability Counselling Service, which is based in North East England. I am a member of the BACP and I adhere to their ethical framework for good practice. I became a counsellor back in 2009 and worked in numerous settings over the years, including GP surgery, place to be, rape crisis and disability charities. I became more and more aware of the lack of professional services specifically aimed at those with disabilities and illness. That is when Emotional Respite was born back in 2014. My aim was to try and make psychological services more accessible. I want to start by sharing with you an article I wrote which was published on The Mighty, a platform which supports people with disabilities and illness to share their experiences. It is entitled, "I Grew Up Not Talking About My Disability. I Want to Change That for Others." As I was growing up, I always had the feeling no one could relate to my experience of living with a disability. I have spinal muscular atrophy type 2 and scoliosis. I felt like I didn't really fit in this world as my disability was never talked about. I went through mainstream education and overcame many challenges along the way. I never had a friend with a disability or illness growing up, and I had no one to relate to about being hospitalised for weeks on end. In those days, there was no support in schools. My fellow pupils helped me day by day, but I often felt ignored by the teachers. I had terrible anxiety all of the time and I was incredibly introverted. I am glad things have changed since then. I felt like I needed a survival guide to get through what would have been a normal day to most. Not talking about my disability was great on one level because I felt people just saw me for myself, but on another level, it felt like I was denying the difficulties I was experiencing. I'm aware my parents were never offered any emotional support by professionals, and this meant that they never had the opportunity to talk about the impact I had on their lives. No one can prepare for being told that their child is disabled and that their daily life would be changed forever. I wish I had someone to talk to when I was younger about my experiences so I could have had a better relationship with myself sooner. It was easy to be depressed, frustrated, and isolated in my experience. I found myself protecting those around me from the fact that life was sometimes overwhelming for me. I didn't want to upset my loved ones, since none of this was anyone's fault. So I became the girl who always had a smile on her face. No one could see past this, and it took a long time for me to work through the resentment I felt towards my disability. Growing up, I constantly thought about what I couldn't do, what experiences I was missing out on, and thinking my life would never be normal. This was a difficult journey of acceptance to face alone. But years down the line, this inspired me to forge a career as a counsellor. It wasn't an easy decision to specialise in disability and illness, since I knew firsthand how complex those issues can be. Having gone through my own personal journey and finally appreciating everything that my disability has taught me, I felt it was time to offer this support to other individuals with disabilities. I have met some wonderful people on this path and I have helped individuals acknowledge the difficult days, but at the same time, I've encouraged them not to be defined by their disability or illness. I felt I was given this hand in life to do something positive with it. I feel passionately that individuals should be supported to reach their potential. I think it's important for individuals not to face their struggles alone. This led me to start developing a more inclusive, accessible counselling service. As a counsellor with spinal muscular atrophy, I was aware on a personal level of some of the difficulties individuals may face when trying to access counselling. I myself had found my own personal barriers to practice as a counsellor with a disability. I came across many inaccessible therapy rooms in my search and finding somewhere to work. I thought, if this is my experience as a counsellor with a disability, then what would be the client's experience if they were limited in the same way? So, I began to think about what type of service was needed, who was it for, what accessibility issues would have to be considered, and so on. So let's start at the beginning. What does disability and illness mean to you? Have a think for just a moment. I'm sure that you will all come up with different adjectives to describe what that means to you. It may even conjure up some images. The Disability Discrimination Act defines a person with disabilities as someone who has a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on the ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. Illness is defined by an individual, a disease or period of sickness affecting the body or mind. Sometimes we focus too much on these labels, which are secondary to the individual, as the person comes first. My focus within my work is on the individual and not on their diagnosis. As a society, we often take our health for granted. Realistically, we will all experience ill health or disability at some point in our lives, yet I don't think many people acknowledge this. Simon Parrott, a counselling psychologist who has a disability himself, stated, "As a minority group, disabled people differ from most others in that anyone can become a disabled person at any time in their life. Despite this, or perhaps because of this, there is often a tendency for therapists to collude with the process of denial or to distance themselves, seeing disability as something that happens to others." I think this is an interesting point you may wish to reflect on yourselves. I feel that this is often a natural reaction to disability in my experience. There can be that element of, that will never happen to me, and therefore it's not something people tend to think about. According to Disabled World Statistics, there are over 11 million disabled people in the UK alone, and about 2 in 10 adults live with a disability worldwide. That is around 15% of the world population. That is a huge amount of people who may need support but may not have the same opportunities to access it as everyone else. Disability and illness are life-changing events that affect not only the individual but all of those around them. I think it's important to acknowledge this ripple effect. Accessing psychological support may not only be difficult for the individual with a disability or illness, but also their caregivers. As a counsellor setting up in private practice, I acknowledged that I had a professional responsibility to look at creating an accessible service in line with the Equality Act of 2010. This Act states you must avoid discrimination, harassment and victimization of protected groups. Where necessary, you must also make reasonable adjustments for disabled people. The Equality and Human Rights Commission states, the duty to make reasonable adjustments aims to make sure that a disabled person is offered a service as close and as reasonably possible to the standard offered to non-disabled people. When the duty arises, you are under a positive duty to take steps to remove or prevent these obstacles. This means you cannot wait until a disabled person wants to use the service. You must think in advance and on an ongoing basis about what disabled people with a range of impairments, such as people who have a visual or hearing impairment, a mobility impairment or learning disability, might reasonably need. I looked at some of the barriers people with disabilities and illness faced when accessing support for their mental and emotional well-being. I feel it is important to have an awareness of how disability and illness may impact on the client. For the purpose of this presentation, I am going to focus more on physical disability and illness, as this is such a broad subject. So, the barriers may include accessing appointments. First of all, is it feasible? Many of us would take for granted that we were able to attend an appointment and not give it a second thought. For someone with a physical disability or illness, this may be something which may take a lot of planning. Planning is part of daily life for those who need support to achieve their goals. Individuals may find that travelling is difficult. Clients may not have enough support to access face-to-face services, as their support may be heavily based around their physical needs and not their psychological needs. Face-to-face services might not be available. And if they are available, are they accessible? Do they have appropriate facilities such as an accessible building, disabled parking, disabled toilets, braille signs and interpreters for the deaf, and so on? Some clients may have health issues which do not permit them to leave the house. For example, clients who suffer with severe mobility issues, chronic fatigue, anxiety or phobias. Being housebound may exacerbate mental health issues, as individuals may feel stuck, isolated, alone, forgotten, not a valued member of society, lack enjoyment or mental stimulation or interaction with others, as well as lacking purpose or identity. Another consideration could be the physical cost to accessing an appointment. Many disabilities and illness can cause fatigue, and I think it is an important consideration which should be addressed with clients when accessing therapy. In my practice, I have worked with my clients to assess whether the session time is manageable. 50 minutes may be too long and they may need a break in the session, or shorter sessions offered. Often, with limited resources or energy, individuals with disability and illnesses are faced with choosing which activity to do. They may feel that their mental health does not come at the top of their list of priorities. Medication could also be a barrier to therapy in some cases, as many medications taken to manage pain, for example, have unwanted side effects, which would contribute to fatigue and tiredness, making the individual feel drowsy and have poor concentration. Memory loss is also often reported with the long-term use of anti-anxiety drugs, antidepressant drugs, sleeping aids, and hypertension drugs. Individuals may have a fear of stigma, as they may have to involve others to support them to achieve their goals. Needing support takes away the client's independence, autonomy, and privacy, and they may not want to say when they need help. There are many barriers that people with disabilities and illness may face, but the list is non-exhaustive. Thinking about the need for accessible service leads me on to the question: are disabled people more prone to mental health issues? We have to consider that according to the World Health Organization, disabled individuals are subject to stigma and discrimination on a daily basis, and they experience extremely high rates of physical and sexual victimization. Therefore, it may be more likely that these stresses may lead to mental health issues. Often, individuals with disabilities and illness are marginalized in our society, promoting their isolation and exclusion. Disability hate crime is on the rise, and cuts in benefits have impacted greatly on some of the most vulnerable people in our society. Individuals with invisible illnesses and disabilities often report feeling judged, as there is a lack of awareness of less visible ailments. I became aware as a practitioner that not thinking about meeting the needs of people affected by disability and illness exacerbated the problems they already faced. This encapsulates the term disableism, which describes the negative attitudes, environmental factors, practices and behaviours which intentionally or unintentionally discriminate against people with disabilities, which creates barriers to equal participation in mainstream society. Physical disability and illness create both logistical and emotional challenges that present themselves daily. Coping with a disability may be easier if you have someone to talk to about the challenges of daily living. The charity Sense found that 23% of disabled people feel lonely most days, rising to 38% for young disabled people. This social isolation is not promoting good mental health and well-being for these individuals, which in turn may impact on their self-esteem, confidence, and could result in depression. There are a number of models of disability, but the two most commonly referred to are the social model and the medical models of disability. The model which can be applied to the provision of services is the social model. Scope states the social model of disability says that disability is caused by the way society is organised rather than by a person's impairment or difference. It looks at ways of removing barriers that restrict life choices for disabled people. When barriers are removed, disabled people can be independent and equal in society with choice and control over their own lives. Disabled people developed the social model of disability because the traditional medical model did not explain their personal experiences of disability or help to develop more inclusive ways of living. Barriers are not just physical. Attitudes in society based on prejudice or stereotype or disablism also disable people from having equal opportunities to be part of society. I wanted to create the opportunity for individuals to access emotional support by creating an online counselling service which would remove some of the barriers to accessing psychological services. How do I achieve relational depth with my clients? Rogers was one of the first to describe the therapeutic relationship as the helping relationship, and believed that the necessary and sufficient conditions needed for a successful working alliance were acceptance, genuineness, and empathy. Within my practice, I offer these core conditions to my clients as I believe an accepting attitude is key to achieving relational depth. My clients may not have experienced this a great deal due to negative attitudes within society. I am congruent with my clients so that I gain a very clear understanding of what their disability or illness means to them, keeping them in the centre of the therapeutic experience. I feel that my own life experience and self-awareness are major factors that I blend together to go beyond the clinical expertise which I have been taught. My use of self helps my clients feel related to and understood on many levels. Showing my clients unconditional positive regard may create different challenges within the therapeutic relationship if they themselves have never fully accepted their disability or illness. Perhaps they may have never felt fully accepted before, and this can be incredibly powerful. My service gives individuals the opportunity to be empowered to access support themselves. This may be a unique experience to some. It gives the opportunity for individuals who may be alone and isolated, or conversely, for those who may never be alone or with around-the-clock support to form a therapeutic relationship. Accessing online therapy independently may be the only thing they do alone. This experience can offer separation and space for individuals who are dependent to be autonomous. This can promote their sense of self, increase their self-confidence and self-esteem. Fundamentally, my service is about providing clients the opportunity to connect with me, to be heard, valued, and prized. What can an online counselling provision bring to those who live with disabilities and illness? I offer a range of mediums for individuals to access psychological support, including synchronous, asynchronous, audio and video conferencing. These mediums can enable individuals with various disabilities and illness to access support. For example, an individual with speech and language problems could use synchronous or asynchronous mediums. Assistive technology is the term used for a wide range of software and hardware designed specifically to assist the user to be able to use computers, tablets, and smartphones. Communication aids are also available which could allow the user to access psychological support such as eye recognition software. Technology can create new opportunities for those using assistive technology. This can allow many more people to use online services. The availability and accessibility of online services doesn't have the same physical payoff as going out. It can be accessed by those who may struggle with fatigue or lack support to get out. Online services are convenient and fit around daily life as an inclusive resource. It's cheaper due to no travel cost. It reduces stigma due to greater privacy. It promotes client autonomy, separation, self-development and resourcefulness, empowering the client. It can also offer safety, as it offers the clients a platform to disclose any neglect or abuse, promoting the safeguarding of vulnerable adults. It can enhance an individual's quality of life, allowing them to access support when needed. It in part addresses marginalisation in society and the rights of people with disability and illness to be treated equally. Online counselling could break new boundaries in the provision of services. Fundamentally, it removes the barriers. It is important to consider the client's experience, and for many people with disabilities and illness, online work may have a distance built into the therapeutic contact and relationship. This could mimic many disabled people's lived experiences of society and relationships. Therefore, it may be a medium which is comfortable to use on many levels. If any therapeutic relationship is to be achieved, a deep empathetic understanding is needed of the issues raised today. A deeper empathetic understanding of not only the emotional needs of people with disabilities and illness, but also their practical needs. This promotes relational depth when working, as well as the ethics, values and principles outlined in the BACP Ethical Framework for Good Practice. Therapists need to show their ability to relate and understand so that as professionals we don't feed into their isolation. How we can apply the ethical principles for good practice is something we should all consider. Promoting psychological services for all encourages practitioners to have a holistic view of their clients' circumstances. Therefore, barriers to the provision of services can be addressed. This promotes better mental health within this minority, supporting individuals with disabilities and illness to reach their potential. Disability and illness doesn't just affect the individual but also those around them, and therefore offering an accessible service can potentially improve many lives. From my own personal experiences, I understood there was a need for accessible psychological services. Providing this service has had a transformational effect on the lives of my clients. I would like to encourage counsellors to think about how they can make their practices more inclusive, and I hope you have found my presentation informative. Thank you.